everyone for being here. And we're recording the session, so if you're logging in and checking out the session later, thanks for being here as well. My name is Brian Tormey, and I'm gonna very pleased to be here and help dive into the conversation today. We've got a fabulous panel, a few people that we've had on the panel before, and some new people, and really excited to get into today's topic on Local 97 and energy efficiency. With that, Richard, I'm going to turn it over to you to take us into HGAR and OneKey.
Thanks, Brian, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here, and welcome to our webinar series to share best practices for getting real estate deals done in New York. I'm Richard Haggerty, CEO of OneKey MLS, the comprehensive multiple listing service for the New York region. OneKey has more than 46,000 subscribers and serves the region from Montauk to Manhattan to Monticello. OneKey hosts the Be Your Best series with the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors, which represents more than 14,000 real estate professionals in Manhattan, the Bronx, Westchester, Putnam, Rockland, and Orange counties. As Brian said, today we're here looking at energy efficiency guidelines in New York. What do they mean? Are co-ops and condos making the grade? And what are the costs of non-compliance? I noticed walking by a building right on my corner at the Upper East Side, they had a big D on their window, and I thought, yeeks, I wouldn't want to see that if I was living in that building. Our panel of experts will outline the ABCs of building grades and what you need to know to get deals done. Thank you, Brian, as always, President of Title Vest, for partnering with us on this series and moderating our panel discussion. Title Vest is a leading New York City-based title insurance agency and a member of the First American family. Title Vest offers a full range of services for real estate property purchase and refinance transactions. With offices in Manhattan and Westchester, Title Vest engages in transactions upstate, downstate, and nationwide. Title Vest has won the New York Law Journal's Best Title Agency for the last 10 years running. Now let's meet our panel. We're pleased to have with us Bruce Cohen. Bruce is a partner in the New York law firm Cohen & Frankel, which specializes in real estate in Manhattan and the region. Also joining us is April Royster. April is the Executive Vice President of City Quiet Windows in New York City, which designs, manufactures, and installs soundproof window systems. And again, as somebody who lives on the Upper East Side, I know just how important that is. And Peter Goldberg is also with us today. Peter is the Strategy Section Manager at Con Edison in New York. Peter, April, Bruce, we thank you so much for being here. And Brian, take it away.
Myself, a big shout out and thanks to you, Richard, and everyone at HGR and OneKey, Jeff, Kathleen, Gary, everybody. We really appreciate this this ongoing session and getting together to talk about great things. For our audience here live, a couple quick housekeeping items. Questions are extraordinarily welcome, especially on a topic that's going to get a little bit technical at times, like today's topic. Please do bring those questions. We want you to walk away with a comprehensive understanding. The best way to do it is the Q&A function in Zoom. For most of you, that'll be at the bottom of your screen, two little chat bubbles over each other with Q&A under it. For some of you, sort of touch at the top of your screen on a mobile device and it'll drop down from the top. And put your questions in there as well as your name, and then I'll sort of read those questions out to our panelists at the appropriate time in the arc of our conversation today. You're also welcome to use the chat function to chime in your affirmations, agreements, or disagreements with sort of the conversation at hand. But if you can, try to funnel the questions over to the Q&A function. That helps me make sure I find them in the right spot. All voices are totally welcome. If your question is one that you want us to unmute you for, mention that in your question, and we can do that as well. Otherwise, Richard, before we get all the way into our panelists, we're going to come back to you for some market moves, some stats and things. Although I will say, I'm going to echo what I said a few minutes ago. Bruce being busy, associates coming in and out of his office and calls coming in, like that feels like a little bit of positivity to me, is just seeing some market movement live on camera. Bruce, I'm going to put one of those panda cams in your office so like I can just sense what's happening in the market by watching what's happening in your office. Okay, with Richard, why don't you give us the real stats?
Well, I'm going to get really technical, Brian, and use the words of the famous Bruce Cohen and say, the market's not dead. That's pretty much all I can say. Yeah, the numbers are the same numbers we've been seeing for the last several months. The reasons are the same reasons.
Mhm.
We're talking high interest rates. We're talking sellers who are not motivated to sell. But I did find really, I think, a pretty significant glimmer. I'm out in Long Island at my Farmingdale office today, so I was kind of focusing on Nassau, Suffolk, and Queens counties, and I was focusing on pending sale counts. And if you look at, let's just say July, pending sale counts were down a little bit more than 10%. August, pending sales were down 11.5%. September, they were down 6.5%. In October, they are up 9.3%. So all of a sudden, we have seen a jump into positive territory that we had not seen in the previous 12 months. Now, is that going to be a sign of things to come? I hope so.
Mhm.
I don't think we're going to see a real vigorous bounce up, but I kind of am echoing what Bruce said, because Bruce said he's seen activity, and I think that this also holds true for the city as well as the Hudson Valley, that we are starting to see some activity, and we've seen some positive comments from economists about the trend that they believe will continue, where interest rates are they've hit the peak and are starting to come back down. So I think when people start to believe in that trend, we're going to really see that activity continue to percolate.
Okay. That sounds like good news to me. I'll take it. I will take it. Considering the places the market we've been in, I think, feeling like we've got that juncture where the inflection is turning the other way, even if it's not steep, I'll take an inflection. With that, let's dive into today's topic. We've got a lot to cover, and an excellent set of panelists here to do it. We're going to talk about New York City's Local Law 97. Principally speaking, there are some other local laws that sort of feed into this energy efficiency topic, and a handful of other sort of implications across the board. But we want to talk about Local Law 97 and its implications of the scores. Richard, you were just mentioning walking down the street and seeing a D score on a building. Right, we've gotten for many years used to seeing those scores on restaurants, and now they're showing up on all of our other buildings, our residential and commercial buildings. And sort of what does that mean? And why is that grade there? And what is the implication on the building ownership and maybe on the building, the unit owners for the residential buildings in those buildings? So with that, I'm going to turn over to one of our experts, Peter, who helps head up strategy for Con Edison. I feel like if there's anyone who should know a lot about energy efficiency, it's Con Ed. So I'm going to hand the microphone over to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about sort of the implications, the scores, what's going on with this Local Law 97?
Sure. So I'd say there's two local laws to pay attention to here. There's Local Law 95 and Local Law 97. Local Law 95 it's there to make energy visible. Like, you walk past a building, you see the facade, you see maybe the vibe, you see the activity. You don't see the energy.
Mhm.
So what Local Law 95 requires is that buildings that are over 25,000 square feet have to post those Energy Star ratings and their associated energy grades in a conspicuous location near each public entrance of the building. So it makes the energy visible.
Mhm.
And the Energy Star ratings, they rank a building's energy performance against that of similar buildings in similar climates nationwide. So multifamily buildings in cold climates get compared against other multifamily buildings in cold climates. The math is a little more complicated than that, just because Energy Star can take account of things like the shape of the building, number of occupants, that kind of thing. But after taking all that into account, Energy Star provides percentile scores. So if you're more efficient than 85% of similar buildings, then you'll get a score of 85 and you'll get an A. If you are more efficient than 70 to 84% of similar buildings, you'd get a B. If you're more efficient than 55 to 69% of comparable buildings, you'd get a C. If you are less than 55%, if you're more efficient than less than 55% of buildings, then you would get a D. The only way to get an F is to not submit your information. So you definitely want to submit your information. You don't want to end up with an ugly F on your front door. As you walk down the street, you might also see some letter grades of N. That would mean that the building is exempt basically because Energy Star can't produce a reliable ranking for that kind of building. So that's Local Law 95. That's what gives you your energy grades. What Local Law 97 gives you is the potential for fines. What Local Law 97 does is for buildings that have over 25,000 square feet, most of them will have greenhouse gas emissions targets. And that's going to be based on the property type and the square footage. And different property types have different expectations regarding efficiency. Say hospitals, by their nature, are going to be more energy efficient, or sorry, they're going to be more energy intensive than a multifamily building. That's reflected in the targets. These targets come into effect in 2024, next year, but they become much more stringent in 2030, and they become continually more stringent thereafter.
Mhm.
And the thing about Local Law 97 is that if you exceed that target, then you need to pay a fine. And the fine is $268 per ton of CO2 that you are over your limit. And could you pull up the slide that I had on that? Because it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around the idea of carbon emissions. I want to make this concrete. So here's an example of about 87,000 square foot building in Manhattan. Built in 1964, little over 100 units, has a gas-fired boiler. This building uses 8,200 MMBTU of natural gas, that's 82,000 therms, and about 1,900 MMBTU of electricity, which is about 550,000 kilowatt hours. So it takes carbon when you emits carbon when you burn natural gas or when you create electricity. So this building is responsible for about 595 tons of CO2. Now, in 2024, that puts them over the limit. Their limit is only 586. So they have a fine of about $2,500. It's pretty small. And that's what I think a lot of buildings are going to see in 2024. Most buildings won't have fines. A lot of the ones that do won't see it as a huge expense. But look what happens in 2030. The limit decreases by half. And those fines that were previously very manageable jump to 60,000, which is about $580 per unit. That starts to bite. And the limits get stricter over time. The fines go up. The reason the fines aren't going up quite as much as you might expect is because electricity starts to get a lot cleaner after 2035. But you don't want to pay those fines. So what can you do to comply with your Local Law 97 limits? Well, the number one thing you can do is to reduce energy usage. If you're not using as much natural gas, not using as much electricity, you're not going to be responsible for as much carbon emissions, and your fines are going to go down or disappear. The other big thing you can do is install heat pumps. Heat pumps, they're kind of like air conditioners that work in reverse. They take heat from the outside and they let you use that heat for water heating or space heating. And what Local Law 97 lets you do is count the electricity that you're using to run those heat pumps as almost a credit against your emissions. So not only are you reducing your fine by reducing your gas usage, you're also reducing your fine by using electricity in the heat pump. So I think that's going to have a big impact in how the economics of those projects work out. If you run an affordable building, then you can also comply with Local Law 97 through the prescriptive pathway. And what that says is that if you've done these 13 concrete things, like install pipe insulation, install boiler controls, do appropriate air sealing, then we're not even going to look at the emissions. You're in compliance. You've done the 13 things you need to do. The other thing that's possible to do in at least a limited way is purchase renewable energy credits or RECs or carbon offsets. You're allowed to do that up to a point, but that can't be your whole solution. The city put some limits on how much you're allowed to use that to reduce your fines.
excellent overview. Lots of moving parts here, but I think very, very well explained for all the moving parts. Peter, you spoke to sort of we've got this grade, you've got your usage, it leads to a measurement standard, and that measurement standard is going to go down over time. And with the measurement standard going down, if you're not below it for your building, then you're going to get fines. Some of those things that you can do, as you talked about boilers and things. April, I'm going to come to you next because you and the City Quiet team have been helping a lot of buildings tackle this issue by addressing sort of the energy efficiency, the heat loss, and thus the overuse of the boilers and the heating and all those things that is needed, because we live in a city that's got a lot of leaky windows, and to say the least. So can you tell us a little bit about what you and City Quiet are doing and some of the buildings and projects you've worked on as a way of cost efficiently and like resident owner impact efficiently tackled from a Windows perspective?
Absolutely. So City Quiet has teamed with Con Edison. We've joined their incentive program. And so the City Quiet window is approved for energy efficiency. So instead of changing out the windows in the existing residential or even commercial space, we work to provide an interior secondary window, which is a part of the weatherization program. So that's going to help seal and keep in the heat or the cool with the building that people are living in or working in. And so this allows for the heating and cooling costs for those buildings to decrease and the amount of carbon emissions to decrease. So this is a great way to not only make sure that your energy efficiency is increasing, but also a financial decision to ensure that the building is getting the best product for the best price. So while we are also part of the incentive program, our windows are going to be much more financially responsible than replacing the entire window itself. So this will also cut down the need for a sidewalk shed, the amount of time that we're spending to do the project within the home. And it's also a great project because it doesn't require the residents or the commercial space to actually stop in its usage. So you can live, work inside the space while we're installing the windows. They take about an hour a window, and then we're out of the space usually within the day, depending on how many windows are in the space. So this gives the client a better option when it comes to being energy efficient and being more carbon neutral in their spaces.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, an hour a window, Bruce deals with some properties and transactions where there are like 87 windows in the apartment, but most of our New York City apartments only have like, 4, 6, 8, 10 windows, not a huge number. So that's great. Might be a 1 day per unit kind of gig. That's really awesome, April. And with that, I want to touch back before Bruce, we're going to turn to diligence process here in a bit, but April and Peter, can you talk a little bit about some of the sort of incentive piece as well?
Yeah, I can kind of kick it off, Peter, and you can add anything that I leave behind. The great part about incentives is you're looking to do these types of improvements to the building as is. You want to improve your grade, you want to decrease the amount of carbon that the building's using. And so Con Ed is making sure that you're being incentivized to do those things. So if you can show the amount of energy that you're saving, they're willing to give you dollars for that energy saving. And so beyond even avoiding the fine that you may receive or are going to receive in 2030 and beyond, you're now getting those dollars back in a way to continue other programs. And the best part that I love about the incentive program is that the more that you do and the more energy that you're saving, the more dollars that Con Edison is willing to give you. So really, if you're looking to tackle this problem, you don't need to do one project at a time. You can do multiple projects at the same time, and Con Edison will reward you for doing those projects simultaneously. Yeah,
pretty impressive stuff. Peter?
Yeah, so thank you. And that's exactly what I like to see and hear, because it's true.
That wasn't planned. April wasn't paid $20 to do that layup.
Maybe you didn't. Maybe you didn't.
Over $20 now, but it wasn't planned.
Yeah, but no, we're certainly very excited about what she's doing, and we're growing our support for multifamily buildings In particular, we're growing our support for helping them improve their building envelope and doing things like April was talking about with window inserts. We're also doing a lot of roof insulation. And I just want to give you a sense of what the incentives can do to make these projects viable. I have a quick example of a roof insulation in a 122,000 square foot, 147 unit building in the Bronx. And the total project cost for this one was going to be about $295,000. Con Edison was able to provide an incentive of $250,000. Yeah, $250,000. The customer was on the hook for $44,000. And that resulted in a payback period of a little over 2 years. If Local Law 97 had been in effect, then that payback period would almost have gone in half if they were over the limit sufficiently. So it's definitely the kind of program that you should keep in mind. Said envelope is very important to us. Electrification is the other area of growth. We need to have widespread electrification across our service territory if we're going to meet our goals. And while we're very focused on those things, we also incentivize all kinds of measures. Energy management systems, pipe insulation, steam traps, controls, elevator modernizations. Take a look at our program manual. And if you see something that you want to do and you don't see it there, still reach out to us. There's a custom path. And our incentives, they can cover up to 70% of project costs for market rate, up to 85% for affordable housing. And we have partners that can provide low or even no interest financing for energy efficiency and electrification projects.
Yeah, that's awesome stuff.
If you don't mind, I'd real quickly. I also want to do a plug for at least some people who aren't Con Edison. I can do a plug for some of our partner organizations. If you're looking for a place to start, I very much recommend that you reach out to New York City Accelerator. They're an excellent resource. They offer free personalized assistance. They can get you help with technical assistance, help you find a contractor, help you identify financing. They're really a great place to start.
Okay, that's great. Maybe, Peter, if you're game to put that in chat into our whole, their website, that might be a great resource to hand out for everyone in the audience. Bruce, we're going to come to diligence because I know our agents and brokers are very, that's the meat and potatoes that they really need to know and understand. But although you said you didn't need credit for it when you messaged me on privately, I'm still going to give you credit for it. April, Bruce has got a question for you. And it's a great question. Can you speak to, because I think a lot of our agent audience is very aware of when you're doing windows, landmarks can be a whole mishigas, right? There can be a whole bunch of stuff there. Can you talk a little bit about how City Quiet windows fit into that from a landmarks windows perspective and permits perspective side of things, and how turnkey it is?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that question. Landmarks is a big fan of City Quiet Windows. We work with them very frequently. They really appreciate the fact that our product is designed to not affect the sightline of the building. So when you are looking from the inside out, you're going to have a much thinner frame, and from the outside in, it's really an invisible product. And that is what is a big part of why Landmark is a big fan of what we do. We allow you to keep the Landmark windows that are there, which we know can be quite the process to replace if you can replace them. And we allow you to still have the weatherization that you need to help, as well as noise cancellation. So the City Quiet window has always been for noise cancellation. The energy efficiency was something that Con Edison was nice enough to test and give us the data to prove that we were able to do those things. And we just did a very large Landmark hotel on Broadway, and they are very pleased with the product and have already seen a decrease in the amount of energy that they're using to heat and cool the hotel. So it's great.
That's awesome. Okay, with that, Bruce, we're going to come over to you. We've got a whole bunch of agents in the audience. Oh, and Peter, I see you put the link in the website. Gary, you may have to post that to the whole audience for Peter, because I think as a panelist, he may not be able to do the whole. Thank you, sir. Okay, Bruce, let's talk about how these local laws are impacting transactions from a diligence side, if you're buy side, from a thinking about what's coming down the pipe, if you're on the sell side, how to navigate it, how to ask the questions. I'm going to hand the microphone over to you. You had a ton of expert guidance on this during our prep session. So the floor is yours, good sir.
Hi. Hi, everybody. So the first thing I do is I realize my target audience is the brokers. And with that being said, one of the things I hear is, oh, this is going to be like local law 11. It is and it's not. I don't think it's as quote unquote negative as local law 11 for the following reasons. One is if they've done the work and they're aware of it and they get a head start on it, it's not something that every 5 years, which local 11 is facade work and facades weather, and every 5 years you gotta spend a lot of money, probably a building. So for one thing, I don't know that it's something that's relevant right now, and it will be for the next 5 years. But I think once the buildings get efficient, it also keys into the technology, which I'll get to in a second. And by the way, one of my favorite words is anecdotally, and what that really means is I don't really know the details, but being on the sidelines, but not really, I kind of learn stuff. And what I would say is, so one of the things is just be aware that the biggest concern for me, and it's not the grades, for me, in the due diligence that I have done, a D doesn't, it's not like a kiss of death. Like I always laugh, and my daughter once, we wanted to go to a restaurant in the city. It was Tim Ho Wan at the time. I'd never been there. I love food. And there was a B on the door, and my daughter looked at me and goes, I don't eat at B's. It's not like that with these grades. More important than that is,
right.
It is what are they doing about it, and are they prepared for it? So for example, a couple of the related buildings have Ds, but they've been planning for this for years. So the fines they're not going to have, and by the time it all happens and the earlier they get a head start on it, it's not going to be as big a problem. The second thing I just think about, intellectually, is we're looking at this in a vacuum or a Polaroid one-dimensional thing of today. Over the next 3 or 4 years, they may have machines that suck the carbon out of the whatever, and these things that would be so expensive if they all had to become A's today may not be a problem down the road. So number one, the same way brokers shouldn't write leases, do not give definitive opinions on this because it could come back and bite you. That's kind of my job, but it's only my job in terms of its due diligence. I do the best I could do. So what this has done is it's added a question to my questionnaire that I send managing agents, and I go on Property Shark because they have a place where right in the front page of it at a building, you could check the grade at least. And then at least I could say to the managing agent, hey, I see you have a so-and-so, what are you doing about it? That's more relevant to me than the grade. And are you going to pay fines and things of that nature? I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent. If I'm a broker, maybe I'm looking at buildings that have a real problem and going to people that own there that maybe want to think about selling now before this becomes a real problem. Because it's almost like I know some of the brokers out there, I know this sounds kind of weird, but they concentrate on who's older and call estate lawyers and look for pockets of possible sellers. Well, this maybe is one as well. If there's a building and, people don't know a lot about this yet. A lot of the people that I talk to, other attorneys, it's not even on their radar yet, but it's going to be. So maybe this is a time to reach out to some of those people in those buildings through the doorman or however you do it, and approach them and say, listen, in 3 years, you're going to have a problem. Maybe you want to think about selling. Anyway, one of the other things I noticed, there was a building that had a D and it had a big problem. And the more I looked into it, the problem was coming from the commercial and the retail portion of the building. Now, if the co-op owns that portion or has some certain connection, it may be a building problem. But in this case, it wasn't. And they basically said to the commercial retail owner, you're gonna have to put the heat pumps in, you're gonna have to fix this because we're getting a D because of you. And so really, it's a building by building thing. And you have to take it into consideration when you're doing your due diligence. Otherwise, it could end up killing the deal at the last second. And I always say the more prepared the broker is when they're getting a listing or they represent somebody purchasing, the more this could be brought up right at the beginning. Like if you have a purchaser and you say to the seller's broker, hey, listen, you know, this building has a D and it's got problems, it's going to be very expensive. The same way you do now when there's a big facade project coming up and you get a credit in the contract to allot for this. That's kind of how you could get it done.
Yeah. We've got a good question that's come in from the audience. Brian Neves, and he even spells his name the right way. Good job, Brian. Asks the following question. This is open to anyone from your experience. Has anyone experienced mortgage underwriters, right, lenders, being reluctant to lend on buildings with upcoming local law 97 fine exposure? Or also, I'm going to add my own little part to his question, or lenders being reluctant to approve a building, a condo or a co-op in their process for a low grade?
I have not. I just say from the get-go, just again, anecdotally, I have not.
Okay.
Where I have on these unsafe buildings on local law 11, this is like a new thing that Nikian was talking to us about when we were
yeah.
last.
Yeah, on that
And there are certain banks that wouldn't lend because it was in a, you know, they were doing the work and it was all paid for, allotted for, and the bank just wouldn't lend in the building because of it. I have not seen that with energy efficiency yet.
Yeah. Now, Peter or April, any commentary on this? I've got a little bit of commentary to add from my own experience, but I want to give you a chance. No? Okay. What I'll say is we actually had, I'll let which lender it is remain anonymous, but it's one of the top 4 lenders. The head of their sort of like risk and underwriting process for buildings was here in New York a little while ago, having meetings with a number of their local partners and players, including us here in our office. And we did have a pretty interesting conversation that has since led to a follow-up call or two, where they are now incorporating the review of the building's grade into their building approval process to help them be tuned into this issue. It's not, so to Brian Neves's question, it's not quite that we've seen them like decline lending in a building, but they're now going to start collecting this information as part of their reviewing of a building for the approval process of lending in the building. And I think that itself, and we've had conversations with other lenders. This is just the first lender that's one of the big 4 that I think is actively adjusting their protocol. I think that is pointing towards that the likely answer to Brian Neves's question is going to eventually be a yes, right? This will eventually be a thing that the lenders are looking at and taking into account in one fashion or another, right? Peter, what do you think? You had some head movement.
I'm curious about that. I'm curious about the motivation of the bank and whether they have their own corporate sustainability goals that they might need to meet in this review.
You know that I didn't even, so when in the conversations with this particular lender that I was chatting about and actually a couple other lenders, it's been more about them thinking about underwriting. They've been focused on, in those conversations that I've had, they've been focused on the potential for liens on the building, which could impact, right, essentially their lending approval, their underwriting on the building from a risk perspective. But actually, now that you say that, that is very interesting because there are some lenders that are starting, there are some banks that are starting to move under some pressure in the larger social ecosystem. Banks are some of the things that are getting some focused pressure on agreeing to climate goals and impact goals. and then needing to, having agreed to it, enforce it through their own decision making and their process. And so I hadn't thought about that angle, but I could see that coming.
Let me throw it another angle.
Yeah.
If Fannie and Freddie decide to make that one of the requirements, like they do the amount in the reserve fund or the fidelity bond, that's a new one, but forget about that for the moment. But if they add that, then that would decide whether they could sell the loans on the secondary market, and that would be a nightmare. But like, it's hard to read the tea leaves, but that would be the first thing that would come to my mind.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
see that, but it could happen, and that would be a game changer.
Well, and we know that some of the Fannie and Freddie guidelines are up for, like, they're looking at some things. Like recently they've been looking at whether or not they currently have an exemption for co-ops built into the guidelines for co-ops, or sorry, an exemption for title insurance on co-ops, which has been under discussion whether or not they will continue having an exemption so that you aren't required to have title insurance on a loan on a co-op apartment. And so they are going through some process of revising and re-looking at some of the rules that have been in place for 20 plus years. So Bruce, maybe there will be some activity there. Richard, I feel like that almost becomes one of our political questions. Like, what political actor or senator or representative will like create the pressure on the agency that leads to this? Like, it falls into that zone of our conversations.
By the way, and
Yeah.
now that you mentioned title insurance, I mean, you're not going to say this, but I will. I never used to get title insurance on co-ops, and now I do, because it is actually very cost effective. And you've seen some funky lawsuits lately where, yeah, if you don't have it, maybe the managing agent's responsible, but who wants to sue the managing agent of your own building? And I just find and it's way less than it is for a condo. It's a nominal amount of money. And I just think that in general, it's my feeling has changed over the last couple of years. My partner and I both do.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, hey, look, I'll take it. That's great. April, I'm going to come over to you next and talk. I want to dive a little bit deeper. We've got some time here. Let's go into some of that solutioning. We've got a lot of agents here who may be representing, individual units. And in that case, the benefit of City Quiet Windows might be one of the things that can help their building, right? So they've got a unit, they want to go sell it. It's a condo or a co-op, and they're planning to sell it, and their building's got a D. It's the building that Richard walked by, it turns out. Their building's got a D, and they're sitting there saying, like, well, this D, and while the fines might only be a couple $1,000s, although, Peter, in some cases, the near-term fines aren't just a couple thousand. In some cases, they are much larger. So this seller is sitting there looking at potential fines that are going to come through, and even the grade and those fines are going to, because the attorneys are getting smart as Bruce is. Well, they're not going to be as smart as Bruce, but they're getting wise to the things Bruce is wise to. And they're going to be looking at this on the buy side diligence. So now what can that seller do? They go talk to their board and say, hey, we've got a D, and like, this is happening. Like, we need to wake up. Talk a little bit through some of the granular, like, let's use this example. They've woken up, they're like, we got to do something. What does that agent help that seller do and say to their board, and how do you get involved? What does the timeline look like? Do they have to like postpone their sale for like a year? Like, what happens here?
Yeah, I think getting the board involved is going to be the best thing you can do. I think we as vendors are now spending a lot of time educating clients, educating anyone that will listen about what's coming up, especially in that 2030 timeframe, right? So most, I'm going to say most, so Peter doesn't, come off of mute here, but most buildings will be okay until 2030. 2030 is when they're going to start to feel the pain of either not doing anything or not doing enough. And so that's really what I would say, as someone who's in the market and looking for somewhere as well, that is something you really need to be focusing on. What does that 2030 look like? What are the plans that this board has made? Have they made plans? Are they in contact with vendors? Have they reached out to Con Ed and the accelerator program? there is money out there. There is vendor lists out there. There are things that are set up to help people guide themselves, their boards, their buildings through this process. I will give credit where credit is due. They really have started to put this information out there, and it's very accessible and it's very user friendly. And I think that that is the most value that you can have. The vendors through the accelerator program and through Con Edison have been vetted. They have gone through an application process. We constantly have to meet with them and show them the projects that we're working on for approval and for suggestions for improving that process moving forward. And so they've taken what could be a headache and have started to really make it something that's turnkey and really accessible. Another program that we can talk about too is NYSERDA. And if you can get your board to agree to bring on an on-site energy manager to help you with this process, NYSERDA will cover 75% of that cost. And that's massive. That's someone who can guide you through the process and really help you get the most bang for your buck. And so I think sitting down and having these conversations and really figuring out what that board and that building is willing and able to do to set themselves up for success is key. 2030 is coming a lot quicker than a lot of us would like to admit or even understand. And vendors are going to become overwhelmed. The people that can help you and provide you those processes are going to be inundated with other programs and other projects that they've already started to put on the calendar. I mean, we sit down with full property managements and start to build out these plans. And so if you haven't gotten on the bandwagon to start doing that yet, you're going to end up further and further down the list. So the sooner you can start to do these things, the better off your building and your clients are going to be, because these wheels will have already started to turn.
Yeah, and we know as demand, right, as time goes on, the demand for those services, the different vendors that can do the things that help move up that grade, the demand will go up, the time frame will go down. It's a limited constrained supply of vendors and things that can do it. And so the price will go up, right? And so that's one of those other factors. It's like not just waiting to the last minute and then having to rush and scramble. It's waiting to the last minute and then having to pay more and maybe even miss your deadline and pay some fines along the way in addition to paying more.
And
Right.
Brian,
missing
can I
out.
ask a follow-up question to that, which I think any three of the panelists can answer?
Yeah.
Do you think that there are any buildings and property managers who are taking the position at the end of the day, the politicians, the city council will back off before they start to institute the fines? So they're almost playing a game of chicken to see if it really happens or not?
That hasn't been my experience, and I think the loft law, the artisan residence law, kind of like that's what everybody thought, and then
not.
It's not what it was, but it's not what everybody thought was going to happen. So I have not seen that at all. And by the way, think about incentive that the managing agents have. It's a win-win for them. They get a percentage of any project that's done on the building, I think. I don't know their contracts, but I think they would. And one of the things, April, you were referring to board members. Not everybody knows a board member. But that's an opportunity to call your managing agent. Hey, I was, on this this presentation and they were talking about so-and-so. What are you guys doing about making sure we don't get these huge fines? And they're incentivized to speak to the board about it. Whereas the board members might be like, stay in your lane. I work hard enough. I do all this work and I have a full-time job. Why are you bothering me?
Yeah.
So maybe that's a better avenue to get stuff done. But yeah.
I have two answers. I have one for Brian and one for Richard. Richard, I think that there was a point in time where people started to believe that this would go away. And I will say I was at a meeting last night for Spani, and they had all started to receive their local law 152 bills. And that's for their gas. And I think now that they're seeing that people are willing to fine for things, they're starting to truly believe that this is going to happen. So we've started to see an uptick in people reaching out for those types of things. And I think that the delusion has kind of gone away that these will go away. And then also, Brian, you touched on the fact that eventually the vendors will be, and prices will go up and those types of things. But there's also programs that are going to run out, right? We all knew the lighting program. The lighting program was very successful through Con Edison. It's starting to phase out. So if you're not getting these programs while they're happening, you're going to come to the table and the money's going to be gone. So getting it while it's hot and while the programs are running is key to success.
Yeah, no, very, very smart. We've got a couple questions that have come in our Q&A here, so I want to go to them. I'm going to do the second one first. John Tomasi asks, April, what is the program that can help cover 75% of the cost for an energy consultant? I think it was NYSERDA.
So it's NYSERDA, and it's the on-site energy manager. So I can send the links through, and it'll take you directly to that.
And NYSERDA's FlexTech program can also provide a great deal of technical assistance, including assistance in capital planning for a whole multifamily building portfolio.
Okay, that's great. Okay, wonderful. And then back to Brian, who spells it right, needs, what studies, if any, show a correlation between building letter grades and building market valuations or co-op/condo values? And I'll let our panelists answer, but Richard, I want to put you up on maybe answering this. You may not have data that supports this question per se, but I'm curious if you have data from in One Key on like other kinds of things that are sort of similar to this, like things that are leading to building valuations and thus unit valuations going up or down because of pending regulation, legislation, fines, like other kind of things that are a similar example, not this data specifically.
And the answer is no, it's going to take time, but I foresee that happening sooner than later. There have been pushes for energy efficiency ratings on residential properties for a while, and they really didn't get a lot of traction, I'd say, until about 3 years ago. And I think people started paying a lot more attention. And Brian, you put your solar panels up, I want to say about 3 or 4 years ago, right?
About 4 years ago, yeah.
Well, and I think
another property now, I'm in the midst of doing it now for a similar 24 kilowatt system.
So I think we're getting to the point where we will be able to kind of look at properties and compare properties with solar panels versus properties without solar panels. We'll be able to pick specific fields and start to do those kind of studies based upon that trend that happened, I want to say, about 3 to 4 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, the way I think about it, just using sort of, Richard, you brought me up as an anecdote, right? If I've got an investment property that I'm putting panels on now, and its current electricity bill is in, between the $600 and $800 range total. It's a large vacation home. And so with the panels, that will go down to pretty much zero. And their payoff ratio, I'll be paid off for the cash investment I put in the panels within about 4 to 5 years. So if I sell the house anytime but beyond 4 to 5 years from now, I've been repaid. And now the buyer, when buying it, it almost comes into our interest rate conversation, right? But the buyer, when buying it, when they look at the cost of owning and operating this house, were I to sell this, they're looking at it, and the energy cost of this house is not in their math, right? It's self-powered. And because it's self-powered, that's $600 to $800 a month in savings. Well, that's like a couple, bips or points on the mortgage interest rate, right? Like I've just helped equalize some of the carrying cost of the ownership and made it more affordable, which opens up my pool of buyers, which hopefully pushes up on my sale price. That's the economic theory that I'd like to apply to my decision to put solar panels on the house. And I'm doing better for the world along the way, right? And I get to sleep better at night, make it a better world for my kids. Okay, with that, so Brian, we answered your question. April, you dove us through some of the how this mechanically works a little bit, which is excellent. And I'm going to touch back a little bit to that timeline piece. Some of the different solutions that are available have different levels of complexity, and thus they have different timelines. So for our hypothetical seller, who is decided now is when they're going to go to market, then they find that they've got a D grade and their building is facing, starting next year, a $50,000 fine, which isn't huge, but it's something, and they're worried. From a timing perspective, we know some of the things like like doing the whole boiler system might take a little bit of time. Can you comment on sort of timeline for, for the Windows side of things and any other solutions that you're, familiar with?
No, some quick, things that you can probably do within the month. LED lights can go in pretty quickly. City Quiet windows themselves, we're looking at anywhere from a 2 to 3 week lead time before installation is occurring. So that's your weatherization and the sealing of the space. So those are quick ones that you can get and have done probably before you're ready to even start your first open house.
Okay, that's promising. Go for it, Peter.
Pipe installation is also a quick win. Energy management system, boiler controls are pretty quick wins. If steam traps aren't being taken care of properly, making sure those are repaired and replaced as necessary are very quick wins.
Okay, great. A couple more questions just popped in. Also, from Dennis Goodhart, does Local Law 97, Peter, I think this one is going to be for you, apply to pure commercial buildings, buildings with no residential in them?
Absolutely.
Yeah. It does. And I think our current threshold is any building over 25,000 square feet. Correct, Peter? Although there's been discussions of whether or not that threshold will be dropped at some point in the future.
Correct on both counts.
Yeah. Okay, great. And then Brian has another question. Peter, I think this one comes to you as well. Any plans to expand on Con Ed 0% interest financing? I can imagine that's a little harder for Con Ed to do. It used to be a 2.5% to 3% interest rate environment. Now we're in like a 7.5% to 8.5% range. So I don't know. That's up to you to answer, but
it's something we're looking to. It's something that we're looking to extend, both in terms of time and in terms of segments. And please send me an email in about a month when I can talk about that freely.
Okay, sounds great. And we will have everyone's contact information here for the end. Well, we're near the end of our session today. I think we've got a lot of moving parts, but Peter, you laid it out really well for our audience, of how the mechanics of the system, the program works. April, you presented a lot of good solutions. Bruce, you talked about the diligence side, especially because we're dealing with agents here. I'm going to go around the panel and give you sort of like a chance to give your last words of advice and guidance to our audience today on how they're being proactive and thinking about this topic as it relates to their buyers and their sellers on the listings. Bruce, let's start with you.
Just be aware, this is an issue. Oh, the one other thing I wanted to just mention also, when you brokers are taking clients around, if it's a building with 300 units, economy of scale means those fines and things like that aren't going to be, I realize the bigger the building, the more, but it's not going to be as bad as if it's like a 14-unit building. But I just think you should be aware and make sure everybody is being a Boy Scout, being prepared, because so that in 2030, people don't wake up and flip out.
Yeah, that's good. Peter, how about you?
Yeah, the fines are going to come if you're not below that threshold, and there's no ROI on a fine. You just pay the same fine each year.
Right.
So it's better to invest in your buildings and reduce your energy usage and avoid the fines altogether. The other thing I'd add when thinking about energy efficiency and electrification investments, don't just look at the dollars saved from energy. Think about how it's going to make your building look, and also think about how it's going to impact the experience of people in your building. April raised this point earlier. Noise reduction can be a big deal. Thermal comfort, if it's an office, how productive people are. So consider all of those things when deciding how you're going to manage your energy.
Yeah, I'm going to toss out a quick question back to you, Peter, before we let April wrap us out for the day. As it relates to trying to understand, as an agent or a property owner, understand what the prospective fines might be for their building, is there a quick, easy methodology for a person to sort of get a sense of that? I know they can look online to see their grade, but is there a way for them to help translate that grade into financial impact?
Yep. Go to New York City Accelerator, the link that got shared in the chat. I think on the first page, maybe you need to click a little bit, but you can enter the address
Mhm.
and it will pop out what your fine would be in 2024 and 2030.
Okay, great. That's excellent. So again, audience, that's in our chat. It's the accelerator.nyc URL. We've shared a few in the chat today. So it's that one. And then Peter said sort of click around and find it. I'm sure it's on there in a pretty quick way to find out what your grade is and what the fine is, because that starts to help influence that decision making as a seller or as a buyer, right? Okay, April, with that, we turn it over to you to give us your guidance and thoughts for our audience today.
Yeah, there's money out there to be used and spent on great vendors here in New York City, ones that have been vetted and approved by the accelerator and by Con Edison. So please use those approved lists and use the money that's there to help you make these buildings much better and more energy efficient.
Yeah, okay. Well, with that, a huge thanks, Richard. I'm gonna hold you accountable to that promise to start paying attention to those data points on things like solar and things, so that later we can come back and be looking at that.
Will do.
Okay. Well, with that, to our audience, thank you for being here today. Another great Be Your Best session. Really appreciate hosting it, HDAR team and One Key team. Peter, Bruce, April, always love getting to hang out and spend time with you, even more that we got to sort of geek out on some of this stuff. So for our audience, the contact information is up there on screen. Please make use of it. Bruce is a phenomenal transactional attorney. Like, I use him for my own deals. Go use him on your transaction. He'll help keep an eye out for these things for you. April and her team at City Quiet Windows have helped countless buildings and owners. It doesn't have to be a whole building project. City Quiet definitely does just individual apartment projects as well. And Peter is the man with all the data and insights and the money and the access and the strategy. So like definitely drop him a line and help bring your building level project over to him. With that, thank you everyone. Have a great day and look forward to a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday before we see you all again. Take care.
Thanks for the
Thanks, everybody. Great session.
Bye-bye now.